When we think about protecting nature, what usually comes to mind? Probably a fence, right? A hard line between our world and the wild. But what if, instead of building walls, we built bridges? Today, we're diving into a really radical idea that tries to do just that: biosphere reserves. And really, it all boils down to this one fundamental question. Can we truly live with nature and not just next to it? With all the pressures in the world today, can we create a single, sustainable system where we all thrive together? That's the core challenge we're tackling in this explainer. And to really get why a new model is so critical, just look at the numbers for a country like India. It has just 2.5% of the world's land area, but, get this, it supports 16% of all the people on Earth and 17% of its livestock. That immense pressure means the old model of just walling off nature, it simply can't work. There isn't enough space to separate everyone and everything. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll dig into why a new idea was needed in the first place. Then we'll unpack the three-zone blueprint of a biosphere reserve. We'll see how they're different from national parks, tackle the tough real-world problems on the ground, and finally, find out why they're called living laboratories for our future. All right, Section 1, a different conservation idea. You see, the old way was all about protecting nature from people. This new idea completely flips that script. It asks, how can we protect nature with people as actual partners? Because here's the core problem. Traditional conservation can feel like a zero-sum game. For nature to win, it seems like people have to lose out. But what do you do when millions of people depend on that very land to survive? You can't just kick them out. You have to find a solution with a true balance, one that supports both the ecosystem and the communities living within it. And that exact challenge is what leads us straight to the Biosphere Reserve Blueprint. Now, this wasn't an idea born in just one country. It's a global model, specifically designed to adapt to those intense local pressures, like the kind we just saw in India. So what is a biosphere reserve exactly? Well, UNESCO, who pioneered this concept way back in 1971, defines it as an area that promotes biodiversity conservation with its sustainable use. And that one little word, with, is the absolute game changer. This isn't just about preservation, it's about integration. In India, this idea has really taken root in a big way. The country has established 18 of these notified biosphere reserves, scattered all across its incredibly diverse ecosystems, from the Himalayas right down to the coasts. And of those 18, a full 12 have gained international recognition, making them part of UNESCO's prestigious World Network of Biosphere Reserves. This connects them to a whole global community of sites all working on this shared mission of balancing conservation and development. Okay, so that's the big idea, but how do they actually pull it off? The secret is in their structure. So let's go inside the three zones that make this model so unique. The best way to picture it is like a set of concentric circles. Right at the center, the bullseye, you have the highest level of protection. As you move outwards, the rules for human activity start to relax, shifting from strict preservation to active cooperation. Let's break it down. First, you've got the core area. This is the heart of the reserve. It's a legally protected sanctuary where human intervention is pretty much off limits, all to conserve the ecosystems and species. Wrapping around that is the buffer zone. Here, the rules loosen up. Activities that don't harm the core, like scientific research or ecotourism, are allowed. Finally, you have the transition zone. This is the outer layer where people live and work. It's a zone of active cooperation designed to foster sustainable economies that actually support the entire reserve. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds a bit like a national park. It's a really common point of confusion. So let's get crystal clear on what makes a biosphere reserve fundamentally different. The key differences really come down to focus and people. A national park is often species-oriented. Think of a tiger reserve. A biosphere reserve is ecosystem-oriented. It's looking at the whole picture. And crucially, while parks generally prohibit human activity, a biosphere reserve plans for it. Limited economic activity in the outer zones is part of the model. That's why they're seen as living laboratories for sustainability, not just fortresses for wildlife. Of course, a blueprint on paper is one thing. Implementing it on the ground with real people and real-world pressures. Wow, that's another story entirely. This brings us to the complex reality of the people and the problems. One of the absolute thorniest issues is relocation. To create that strictly protected, people-free core zone, entire villages sometimes have to be moved. As you can imagine, this is a deeply sensitive and complex process with huge impacts on people's lives. Let's look at a real example from the Bajra Tiger Reserve. The relocation effort there had, well, mixed results. On one hand, it was a success. Many displaced families gained access to modern amenities like electricity, drinking water, and schools for the first time. But there was a significant downside. They lost access to essential forest resources like firewood and grazing land, and many felt the new land they were given was just too small or not fertile enough. It's a stark reminder that even with good intentions, there is a very real human cost. Another major point of friction is the compensation gap. When you have people and wildlife living in close proximity, conflict is pretty much inevitable. Animals like elephants or tigers can damage crops or prey on livestock, which is a devastating loss for a family. In theory, the government provides compensation, but in reality, it often isn't nearly enough. And the scale of this gap is just staggering. One study at that same Bajra Reserve found that official compensation covered less than 5% of the value of livestock lost to predators. Imagine that. 95% of the financial loss was just absorbed by local families. This doesn't just create hardship, it creates resentment that can undermine the entire cooperative model. And this conflict is devastating for both sides. For wildlife, it leads to poaching and retaliatory killings, which threaten the very species these reserves are trying to protect. But the cost for people is just as tragic. In Northeast India alone, between 1980 and 2003, human-elephant conflict resulted in over 1,150 human deaths and 370 elephant deaths. It's a deadly cycle. So, given all these challenges, what's the future for this model? This brings us to our final section, viewing these places as living laboratories, where we try to balance an ideal vision with a very difficult reality. I think this quote perfectly captures the spirit of the Biosphere Reserve. They aren't meant to be perfect, finished products. They are living laboratories, dynamic spaces where we can test and learn how to manage our planet's resources in a more integrated, sustainable way. So here's the key takeaway. Despite all the immense difficulties, Biosphere reserves represent a fundamentally different way of thinking. They are a conscious attempt to move past old conflicts and find a working balance between the needs of nature and the needs of people. Which leaves us with a final question. We've seen the elegant theory and the messy reality. So what do you think? Are these living laboratories the future of conservation, a model we just have to perfect? Or are they an idealistic, perhaps impossibly difficult balancing act? That's the question we're all left to consider.